Open source browsers. They tend to advertise themselves as being more private than proprietary ones. Hey, don't you dare spy on me. But how much privacy do they really offer? Do they even look half as good and are easy to use? And what about the most important part that every single user wants? Speed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to compare 4 open source browsers to the big boys, that being the most used by market share. So, meet the contestants. On the open source side we have Librewolf, Brave, Chromium, and of course every Linux distro's favorite one, Firefox. On the proprietary side we have Microsoft Edge and of course the one and only Google Chrome. Open source is something that's often considered, yeah, it's a nice to have, it offers more privacy, but it doesn't look as good and maybe some features are missing. But hear me out on this one. That is not true at all. Sure, not every piece of software has a huge UI team, but some actually care. And they have some really awesome features while also supporting most of the extensions from the browser they are based on. Librewolf, for example, whoa, that's a tongue twister, deletes everything by default, which means no stored passwords, cookies, or other stuff that someone else can use to gather data about you. It also offers an ad blocker right out of the box, and the same holds true for Brave. Brave even has its own search engine, which cuts you loose from Google. Or you just use DuckDuckGo, the default for Librewolf. But are they really better? I want to take a look at the startup time, some basic Google searches, YouTube and other websites loading speeds, as well as some other capabilities. So now, I'm going to test them. Be right back. Not gonna lie, I might need to change the ways that I analyze browsers. Alright, so I've done my benchmarks, but before we dive into them, let me break down the parameters that apply to all of the tests. Number 1. I've tested them all on my Fedora 36 beta system. All browsers are installed with the .rpm package format. They all have google.com set as their home/starting page. Between all of the tests I rebooted my system, I waited 2 minutes, I cleared all of the cookies, caches and histories. And lastly, I've tested it without logging into any accounts whatsoever. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the results. What you see here is a compiled list of how many frames it took for the browser to perform certain tasks. Beginning with the click, the time is observed on how long it takes for the browser to reach the website loaded state. I then loaded the video files into my editing software and counted the frames on how long it took for the browser to reach that desired state. As you can imagine, with all of the reboots factored in, this took quite some time, so please show your support with a like and a sub. Thanks. Alright, let's go. Based on counting the frames, I've rated the browsers by adding all of the frame times from 5 runs of each task. The rankings are gold for the fastest, silver for the second, bronze for the third, and red for the slowest. So let's take a look at the first task, startup time. Google was the fastest, followed closely by Chromium and Firefox. Librewolf performed the worst by needing more than double the time to start up than our other contestants. Really interesting that all the Chromium-based browsers, that being Google Chrome, Edge, Brave and of course Chromium itself, performed way better than the Firefox derivatives. Moving on to basic searches with Google. Since it's the most used search engine out there, we find that Brave is in the lead, followed by Chromium and Librewolf. Edge was the slowest. Be aware by seeing these results that we have an apparent margin of error. Edge was doing searches between 22 and even up to 60 frames, which is kind of interesting. But given the controlled environment, still relevant. We have a similar picture with accessing YouTube, except Librewolf is now the worst by far. But hey, would you look at that? Firefox even managed to be relevant here. Okay, short break. You know what I find interesting about these results? That Chrome is not being seen here, neither with Google nor YouTube. There was a time when Google optimized Chrome for their services, or perhaps they just made everyone else slower. But it seems like that time has passed. Also surprising is that Brave manages to be in front of Chromium 2 times in a row, even though it is based off it. I also wanted to do a test that is not related to Google whatsoever. So I tested Amazon, and surprisingly, Chrome managed to get into second place. Both Firefox and Chromium reached first. Brave is third, and Librewolf is once again the worst by far. So let's sum up the frame times and reach our first result. The slowest of the pack is Librewolf by far, that being over 200 points behind Firefox, that is close to Microsoft Edge. On the third place we find Google Chrome, which is surpassed by Chromium, and finally on the first place, Brave. But what do these results tell us anyway? Even though we had some margin of error, it's hard to pinpoint down the exact cause of it. But what I am saying is that between Brave and Librewolf there is a huge gap. And I've noticed this before. But be aware that these numbers are not bad. I mean, the longest waiting time was 71 frames, which translates to roughly 2 seconds. So let's talk about the real deal that will be determining the winner. These numbers were actual measurements, but they only tell a small percentage of the whole story of what a browser should be capable of. So I ran each web browser through a web benchmark, which tests them for several different use cases, including 3D benchmarks. And here are the results. Chrome had a score of 1539.24, Edge 1454.18, Firefox only achieved 966.59, Brave went above and beyond by beating Chrome and Edge with a score of 1558.15, Librewolf achieved nothing at first, and I had to disable/enable some settings to get it working, but managed to get 950.05 points. And last but not least, Chromium with 1547.05 points. Note here, these are the best results they managed to achieve. So what do we have here? I believe it's safe to say that Brave beats the competition by offering not only the best benchmark scores, but also the best live environment tests. Edge, even though a bit slower in the live tests, manages to beat the champ Google Chrome and even Chromium, which comes in third. So that's it. Brave won, right? Well, to be honest, yes and no. Yes, Brave is the fastest browser and also proves that open source can be on par with proprietary solutions. But that does not mean that that is the whole story. It is based on Chromium, which is open source, but also not really. See, the thing about Chromium is that even though it's open source, the majority of updates and people working on it are from Google. If someone tries to implement features that Google doesn't like, they get reverted. So if you're looking to get away from proprietary software, then you might want to check where you would draw the line. Both Firefox and Librewolf are not Chromium based. So maybe that's a better option for you. But this is your choice. I'm just here to see if any open source browser can beat the big boys. And they definitely can. So if I was helpful and could contribute some information that you didn't know yet, then please make sure to show it with a like and even a sub. If you like this video, then you might be interested into a whole open source operating system. So make sure to check it out. Otherwise, all that's left to say now is good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I'll see you around.